Keys with the novel Neighbor. We are an independently owned and operated bookstore located in Webster Groves, Missouri, or St. Louis, if you're not familiar with our suburbs. Our event today is part of the St. Louis Teen Book Festival, which is sponsored by the St. Louis County Library, HEC Media, and the Novel Neighbor Bookstore. Hosting over 40 of the hottest young adult writers, the St. Louis Teen Book Fest is 11 days of programming dedicated to connecting teen readers with a diverse group of popular writers. You can order all of our authors' books from The Novel Neighbor at thenovelneighbor.com, and there are special discounts if you purchase all of the books for a panel. It's called a bundle, so check that out. Today, I am so excited to be a part of the This Girl Can panel. I'm joined by 4 amazing authors, Holly Jackson, Saied Mendez, McKinney, and Aminah Safi. Their new books all feature amazing leading women with captivating stories that inspire us in so many ways. So what better way to start off our panel than by giving each of our guests a few minutes to tell us about their newest book. Aminah, do you mind starting us off?
Oh, I'm so excited. Thank you so much, Stephanie. For those of you who don't know, I'm Aminah Safi, and my latest book is This Is All Your Fault, which is the story of, I'm going to try to play them up, Ren and Daniela and Imogen as they spend 24 hours trying to save their dying Chicagoland indie bookstore. It is a little bit of Empire Records set in a bookstore, and it's also just my ode to that moment when a girl gang starts forming and you have 3 girls who think they know each other and think that they know everything there is to know about one another from the outside, and then they get a common goal and they realize that they have missed a lot under the surface. So Ren's sort of my much more uptight bookstagrammer who I love dearly. Imogen is my angry girl who cares deeply and doesn't want anyone to know. And then Daniela is our cool girl and secret Instagram poet. And they each kind of find all of that about each other and try to save the place that they love named Wild Nights Bookstore. So, cool.
Elle, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. I'm LL McKinney, and my latest book isn't part of the series that I'm most known for, but it is a graphic novel titled Nubia Real One. It came out in February, and it is about Wonder Woman's twin sister, who is dealing with a lot of stuff that needs to be dealt with and is being dealt with mostly by kids today. A lot of the problems that they're dealing with both socially and in school, like racism and systemic issues and things like that. And Nubia and her friends are just regular kids trying to get by, with the added complication for Nubia that she has super strength and super speed and superness. So it deals with being highly visible as a Black girl who people will likely see as a threat because of this. And the series that I'm known for is the Nightmareverse series, which starts with A Blade So Black, which is an Alice in Wonderland retelling. And it's essentially what if Buffy fell down the rabbit hole instead of Alice, where a girl crosses into the dreamland of Wonderland to kill physical manifestations of humanity's fears, known as nightmares, these big monstrous creatures that cross over into our world and wreak havoc. So those are currently my most recent and my most notable works.
Thank you. They are amazing. Holly, do you want to go next?
Yes, I'll kick off next. So I'm Holly Jackson, and I am the author of this book, A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, and it is a YA crime thriller book about a girl called Pip who, for her senior capstone project in her final year of school, she decides to look into a closed local murder case that happened in her town 5 years ago. And everyone kind of thinks they know what happened, even though there's never been a trial. They know who murdered this girl, Andy Bell, and it's kind of, the dust has settled, but Pip comes along kicking up all the dust and digging up people's secrets, and people don't take kindly to that, and soon her own life might be in danger. So that came out last year, I think. I should probably know that about my own book. And the sequel, Good Girl, Bad Blood, this book came out just a couple of weeks ago, actually. Again, I think time is a strange concept at the moment. I believe it came out a couple of weeks ago there. And this is the sequel where Pip, kind of after everything is kicked off in the first book, she's sworn off her detective days. She's like, right, I'm done with all that. But of course, her town isn't going to let her give up so easy. And she has to pick up the detective mantle once again when one of her closest friend's brothers goes missing and the police won't do anything about it. And since the first book, she kind of released her case as a true crime podcast. So now she has a level of like infamy to deal with as well. And she's got to try and find out where Jamie Reynolds is, and the whole world is listening at the same time. So she's got everyone's opinions and butting in and criticizing her to deal with, as well as trying to solve murders and missing people.
It's an incredible series. Yes, I think I can definitely verify that your book came out just a couple weeks ago.
Oh, I'm glad you can verify that for me.
Yamile, could you tell us about Furia?
Yes, thank you. Furia is the story of Camila Hassan, a girl who lives in Rosario, Argentina, which is also the place where I was born and raised. And she wants to be a professional soccer player. I use the S word, but I prefer football. And so I'll be using that one from now on. And she plays in secret because her family is not supportive of her dreams, although her father was a professional soccer player or football player once upon a time, and her brother is a rising star in their local football team as well. But she has everything set up, and finally her team has this break to play in an international tournament where scouts from the US universities and teams are going to be attending. So she is very invested in this opportunity. But just when everything seemed to be under control, the love of her life, who's a famous football star in Juventus, Italy, comes back to Argentina planning to save her. And the whole story takes place with the background of the Ni Una Menos movement, which is the precursor of the Me Too movement that started in South America in 2014. And she has all these social issues to navigate, as well as a lot of family conflict. And the conflicts in her family are just a reflection in a micro scale of everything that's happening in her society at large.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I know St. Louis we are a huge football town.
Yes.
So I know a lot of us are very invested in your story for a number of reasons. And thank you all so much, or thank you to all of you so much for writing these amazing characters. I want to go back to them specifically. As we discussed, this is the This Girl Can panel. And, what I love about these books are the women that are represented. We have all kinds of different genres represented today, but the theme that ties you all together is these awesome leading women. And so I just wanted to ask who or what inspired your characters? And what was it like to write them? So whoever wants to kick us off first, I'll open it up to everybody.
I'll jump in.
Okay.
I'll do it. I'll just do it. Rip the Band-Aid off. So I did start from the framework of Empire Records. And I essentially like the idea of these three girls, and you have one that's like a cool girl, which is kind of that archetype. And you have one girl who's like really focused and more nerdy and bookish. And then you have this other girl who's really angry. And I liked those cores. And then I just started building the idea of these young women around those. I also gave each of them like a mental health issue that I had struggled with. So Imogen got a lot of my depression, and Daniela got a lot of my impulse and ADHD things that I worked through. And then Rin was dealing with anxiety. And I wanted those to be kind of part of who they were without making the whole story about that, because sometimes, or at least for me, I remember being young and just being like, well, I'm depressed and I got to go clock into work and like work at the Anthropology Today and then like clock out and like make it through the day. And I wanted that feeling on top of the watching each of them react to one another. So that's like one of my favorite things about writing three characters, is that I was in each of their heads. And so I got to have them think about each other, and then you get to immediately jump into the next person's head and realize that that's not what's going on at all. And I I love that like friction of miscommunication, and I love the ways in which we decide who people are and then challenge that by getting back in the perspective of that person and realizing that we don't always see what's on the surface. So that was kind of how I built it.
It's amazing.
Okay, I can go next. So
Yeah.
I like Aminah. Camila has the combination of traits that I have seen in myself through the years. I started writing Furia a long time ago in the early 2000s. So I feel like as I matured as a person, and particularly as a woman, my character grew as well, because I found out what her real dreams and goals were and what her strengths were. But also Camila is kind of a composite of the amazing women that I grew up with and that I saw in everyday life. Sometimes we talk about strong girls of fiction as only the girls who can physically fight or wield a weapon. But I feel like the greatest strength is being able to carry on every day against the circumstances of life. So Camila lives in Argentina, which is my country, and I wanted to show the struggles of growing up in the society that she's a part of, but also the beauty of it. And so it was super fun to be able to showcase the things that I love and miss the most about my culture, while at the same time showing the hard realities of violence against women or misogyny in sports particularly. And so in a way, I kind of created in Camila an alternate universe, a version of who I would have liked to be when I was younger. And because although we share a lot of the same traits, I wish I had been more outspoken or a little more rash and not so careful with every little decision that I made when I was young. And so it was an opportunity to explore experiences and situations that didn't go the way that I would have liked them to go. And so it was kind of like exercising the demons of a childhood and teenage trauma, and at the same time exploring the possibility of what a girl can become even in different circumstances.
Elle, to go back to your characters from both books, whichever ones you want to talk about, but well, so I guess there's some inspiration. We know some of the inspiration behind Nubia, right? But I still want to hear your take on Nubia and also from the Nightmareverse.
Yeah, well, Nubia came about as a result of a lot of things just sort of coalescing. While I was visiting schools for the Nightmareverse, I'm talking to kids. We are saying things that we like comics and video games and MCU and all this other stuff, anime, so forth and so on. And so we start talking about, comics and superhero movies and things like that. And this kid, it's just like a room's predominantly brown and black kids. This kid says something along the lines of how you have these heroes who are running off and averting natural disasters, and stopping volcanoes and stuff. And, Batman stopping purse snatchers, but you don't really see any of the heroes caring about or being impacted by things that affect the Black community. And it took me a minute and I was like, you know what, you're absolutely right. Like, it's something that I have thought about for years, but I never sat and was, just like, why isn't that a thing? We always get allegories, right? We always get the subtle, talk about racism, and it's never really like racism. It's like the X-Men, people don't like mutants, and it's like, well, mutants are actually dangerous. They are. Like, there are movies where people are setting each other on fire with their minds, and a dude killed someone else by pushing a quarter through his brain. So being worried about mutants makes sense. Being worried about just Black and brown people does not. Like, Black and brown people are not dangerous. And you see the same thing sort of mirrored in other stories where they're like, oh, the magic users are the ones who are the one people like distrust them and don't like them and make laws and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, you could literally crush your family with a mountain. So it makes sense. people are trying to rationalize these bigotries through these kinds of allegories. And I've always had an issue with allegorical racism because it just doesn't have the range to do the actual work. So that statement, mixing with being given the opportunity to tell a superhero story, I decided that I was going to give the kids who were wanting a character, a hero, who knew what they were going through and was impacted by what they were going through. And I had pitched a different book altogether for DC. I had pitched Young Justice, and Nubia was in the Young Justice pitch. Because I love Nubia. I had thought she had been done wrong for years. I was going to sneak her in. I thought I was being slick, right? But then they gravitated towards Nubia's story because Nubia's story was what was driving the entire Young Justice team into their latest adventure. So DC asked me to pitch just Nubia, and I took this opportunity to give these kids that reflection, because you never know if you're going to get another opportunity to tell another superhero story. I'm like, this might be the only one ever that I can do. So this is going to be it. And as a result, I'm very happy with the story. The art is amazing. Robin is a stellar artist. People are upset again because most folks are used to dealing with subtle. And the thing is that trying to tell folks how bad things are subtly doesn't work, hasn't worked. So you gonna get this real and you gonna deal with it. You don't have to like it, but it's here and you can't do nothing about it. But as far as Alice goes, Alice, I didn't really set out to do anything with Alice the way that I had with Nubia, with the exception of I had grown up loving science fiction and fantasy, but science fiction and fantasy did not love me back. Like, I wasn't allowed on Middle Earth. I was barely allowed aboard the Millennium Falcon. Like, I'm just not welcome, right? To the point where when I first started writing to be published, the first 3 books that I wrote were about white boys. I thought that's what you had to write to be published because that's all I read when it came to science fiction and fantasy in young adult. Right. And this is back when I'm growing up, you know, it was very scarce. I didn't know Octavia Butler was a thing until college. So my sisters start having kids, and they are falling in love with these genres they're kind of hostile towards non-white people, especially with the stereotypes that are built into these classic stories, right? So my sister's kids are loving this stuff, and I was like, there will be at least one book in this age category, in this genre that I love, where we're not the sassy best friend, we're not the mean girl, we're not dying, we are the star of the show. The Black kid is the star of the show. The Black girl is the star of the show. So that's why I wrote Alice and why I wrote Nubia.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I know there's like so much that we could talk about there, but I think for people watching this, something that really hits me hearing you speak is that the students that you were visiting with, their questions, Nubia was born from that. And that's so cool. And I feel like that matters for everyone watching this, to know that students' voices, your voices matter, and your questions lead to change. So that's a super cool takeaway from that story. I really appreciate that. So thank you for sharing that. And finally, last but not least, Holly, can you talk to us about who or what inspired Pip?
I was just thinking, Pip is quite a funny, it's very British name. So my original books are set in the UK, and then we did the American ones set in America. And I did have a conversation with an editor at one point, and she was like, "Can we change it to Piper?" And I was like, "I don't know a Piper. I actually don't know a Pip either. They're both incredibly rare, but it just sounds really funny when I'm like, Pip from Connecticut." That's my problem. But anyway, Pip, whether she's American or English, she actually kind of was, I have to be careful how I say this, kind of inspired by someone I know in real life who, as a teenager, she was this kind of person who was just always motivated to be doing something that was like beneficial, or like her homework, or like she couldn't just sit down and relax and watch Netflix. Like, I'm really good at that. I'm really good at not doing stuff. So I could not relate to her. And I was like, just like sit down and not do anything. Like, what? And she's like, no, I've got homework that's due in like 4 weeks. I've got to get it done. And so I was like, I can't relate to this at all. But at the same time, I was kind of thinking, I would like to write like a murder mystery book, like young adults. And so it kind of struck a chord. And I was thinking of this kind of person who's just got like a motivation overload to constantly be doing something. Because if they're like sitting still, they don't feel like they don't find the like enjoyment in that. And then I was thinking, well, if there's that kind of person and I want kind of like a detective story really at the end of the day, could I like combine it in some way where I could combine this kind of character who's just overly motivated with solving a murder? And then for the English version, there's this project that you do in your final year at school where you can pick any topic at all. And that's kind of how the story was born, me trying to combine this person I know in real life, steal her, and put her in a murder story. So and as the others were saying, a lot of the there are certain traits. I think often whenever you're writing a main character, they will inherit parts of you, like not necessarily all of you, but certain experiences that you have had, or so and so forth. But for Pip, I would say that I'm quite jealous of a lot of things about her. And as Yamile was saying, actually, a lot of the time she's kind of like, not wish fulfillment, but she's kind of like how I wish I could have been at a certain age, like a bit more forthright, a bit more motivated to get her homework in on time, really, because I was not that person. And so she kind of is like how I wish I could have been. But one of my main things that I kind of wanted to do with this book and series, once I was told I was doing a series, was I quite wanted to explore how like it's okay for girls and young women in fiction to be unlikable and to do bad things. And you know, male characters have been allowed to be bad for a long time, and there seems to be this kind of double standard where when you have female characters doing questionable things that we've probably all done. I mean, I haven't done any of the stuff that's in my book, thank God. I've never murdered nor solved a murder. But it's just this kind of thing where I really wanted to lean into the idea of kind of like the good girl of the title and kind of like dismantle that idea as we see her kind of like embracing her darker side. And like, she might be unlikable, but that's not really the point. You don't have to like a main character in order to empathize with them or enjoy their story. So yeah, just make her as hateful as possible. That's my plan.
I want to go back to a comment you made earlier, Elle, but certainly this is for everyone, about the publishing and editing process. Because you had said your first couple books, you felt like you had to write white men, right, to succeed. What advice do you have for them kind of within that framework, as someone watching this, encouraging them to write and stick to these complex stories? And maybe starting with Elle, but again, everyone's opinion.
I think the main thing that I would say to anyone who's trying to write these stories is that you don't need permission to center yourself in your own work or to center your community in your own work. Your story in that regard is already valid even before you've typed the first word, because you were valid. You know, that's your experience is the basis on how you're going to create your art, no matter what it is, and that is valid. And one thing that I guess I would say, because I would say to my younger self, is go with yourself for a moment, like internalize for a moment what it is that you want out of the book, as opposed to what you want other people to get out of the book. Don't tell yourself no.
And don't reject before someone else can reject you.
Exactly. So I think that's all tied together. So that would be my main thing is it's all about you, babe, and it can be.
Well, and I think I heard in there too, like, it's also okay for your goals to change.
Yes,
like, your goals
yes.
and change. And that feels like that to what you said.
Yes, as you learn and as you grow, because that should be a lifelong aspiration. I'm still learning things. I'm still adjusting.
I think as the others were saying, one of the most important things always is the story, and kind of writing a book and a story that is important to you, because I always think it reflects in the quality of the book. And the way I look at it is I was writing a book that I would just love to read and didn't necessarily have as a teenager or a young adult. I'm still a young adult, I'm going to cling to that. But you know, I like full disclosure, I love murder. I love all things crime. And like when I was growing up, obviously there's all the books that you have to read are, you know, they're always about like the male detective in his 50s who's got an alcohol problem, and he's also like having relations with someone, and he's just being general a bit misogynist, and like those were like the only options he had around, really, the crusty old man detective. And you know, I was thinking of poor little Holly. Like, I'm not going to name any authors. I was just about to name one. He's not a crusty old detective author. He's very talented. I was thinking of her and like what kind of book that she would like to read. And that's kind of the attitude that I always think of when I'm coming up with my plots, because I'm very like plot first. And the character arc kind of goes in along with that, but I'm always plot first. So that's kind of what I think is important, is that you would love this story. Don't try and write to something that you think like will impress publishers or, you know, other people. Although having said that, I do think having kind of knowledge of publishing and like genres and things is important, or like a savvy thing to do. Because often, see, when I first started trying to get an agent, I'd written a book that was an adult book, and it was like an alternate historical book set in like 16th century England. Oh, it was bad. But like,
I have so many questions.
No, we don't talk about that. It didn't really, it wasn't like any category, although YA is actually, I love YA because a lot of the time you don't have to necessarily be in a genre. There's a lot more fluidity than there is, say, in adult books. But I think being aware of like what, like, as I always knew this would be like a YA crime thriller, and the kind of ways they would market it, not to like suck out the soul of the story you want to tell, but I think it's good to be aware, kind of will save you some pain, like I had that pain of being rejected for that book down the line. And then one other thing, this might not be the kind of thing you were talking about, but it's one thing that I always try and say in every panel, because I always see it as like writing advice for people trying to be an author, and it always gets my goat. I don't know if that's an expression in America.
It is.
It is. We know that one. Yeah.
We all have goats that get gotten.
It's true.
And it's that people always say you have to write every day to be an author, and it always annoys me because I do not. I mean, I think if I counted up like every single day in a year, I don't even think I write for half of those days, and it just seems to be this one kind of like untruth that a lot of people like to say, and I don't really like it because it seems like this kind of like exclusionary, oh well, if you don't write every day you can't possibly be an author. And I would just like to put my hands up and say that ain't true. That's BS. I definitely do not. Here, one of the other panelists will be like, well, I write every day, and show us all up. But it's one of the things I like to always say, because I like to dispel that kind of like untruth that seems to flitter out everywhere. So you're allowed to be lazy and be an author.
I so appreciate that. And I feel like you nailed it with a quote. I think your quote is full disclosure. I love murder. Like, okay. No comments. There we go. There it is. Shamilia, can you bring us home?
Yes. Okay. I will try to bring all the threads together. So I will add on to what Elle and Aminah and Holly just said. And if I could go back and give myself, my younger self advice, or, you know, and as somebody who's just starting out to write, a year ago, maybe I would have given different advice. But this last year felt like a decade, and I grew so much as an author and as a person. So somebody who I admire a ton, when I was just starting to pursue publication, told me the advice that you need to write every day. And then in a lecture, she had said how she didn't even have any hobbies, because writing was her everything, and her books were incredible, and she's an amazing person. So that was the little fuel that I needed to feed my overproductive tendencies. maybe when Holly, you were talking about your friend, I thought you were talking about me, because I cannot sit down to just watch a Netflix show if I wasn't, knitting or folding laundry, multitasking in some way. And I used to pride myself in how I explored life and processed trauma and emotion through writing. And that was fine before writing became my full-time job, when I was just writing for myself. But once I started having all these deadlines, working myself pretty much every hour of the day became so unhealthy. So my advice is take care of the machine. The machine is you, in your body, in your spirit, and your mind. And have social interactions with family and friends, and go out and live life, and have contact with nature. And just maybe one day you won't write, you just listen to a whole album from beginning to end, or you will just doodle, or you will just be walking out in the woods. And I promise you that's even more productive than trying to wring out words when the well is dry. So take care of yourself, because otherwise there won't be, a machine, a working machine to tell the stories that you want to tell.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, this is like the best possible note I could think to end our panel on. I know this has just like been a trove of wonderful advice that I feel like even if you don't want to be an author, you can take in and apply it to your life. So I so appreciate you all being here. Thank you so much for your stories and your characters, and for creating them for us. We certainly, on the receiving end of those, are so lucky. And I also want to say thank you to HEC Media and the St. Louis County Library. Just a reminder, you can find all of these books from these amazing authors online. There's a special page specifically for Teen Fest. And just a reminder that there's all kinds of other panels that are being put on by Teen Fest, and all of that is available to watch through the library's Facebook and YouTube link. So thank you so much again, and we'll see everyone later.